Good morning. I hope you don't mind, but I'm going to read once again from my iPad, and because I've got something to say about this particular book. And here we go. This is undoubtedly my most tragic book. The story makes me weep, and it ought to make you weep. It is unusual because it's one of three, which is non-fiction, and the others being The Angel, The Coward, and The Parasite, a fairy tale. Wink, wink. And The Heartache of Marjorie X. And both of those are a Rome and a Cleef. However, this book today, The Tragic and Transgendered World of Margaret Allen, is personal to me because I have felt the tragedy of being transgendered all my life, or at least since the age of 5. For that is when I felt something was not quite correct. Aged 5 in an infant school, 1957, in East London. Not the best place to have such feelings, especially when one had an Edwardian father. So naturally, these feelings and urges were buried for many, many years, until my late teens. Only then, with the arrival of the 1960s, did I manage to begin to explore my inner self. And after that, I spent the next 48 years being myself, as it were. And I have to say they were 48 very happy years, which all came to an end in 2020 when COVID arrived and everything shut down. And now I'm an old man. But whatever it is within me, that pressure, that dichotomy of feeling that one is not resolved, never, ever, ever goes away. I have had a lifetime of thinking about this, and it is possible that I am mentally ill. It is also possible that there may be a spiritual reason, but who can say? However, the condition exists. Nevertheless, taking into consideration what is happening today in the Western world, it behoves me to say, as a man who, after 48 years of feeling like this, I know only too well the hideous mental envy and pain of feeling that I wished I had been born as the other sex. Nevertheless, that always remains my personal problem, and I never had the right to inflict my tragedy onto females in any way at all. I want to make that very clear. So perhaps now it becomes clear why I wrote almost all my novels under the name of Molly Cutpurse. And now, I think having expunged my nature to the world today, I will place a picture of me as I used to be on my posts for those curious enough to see how the world viewed me. Yes, the tragic and transgendered world of Margaret Allen ought to make you weep. It did me. They made him wear a dress before they hung him.
The person we're focusing on today, their life was so intensely private, so deeply misunderstood. And the only historical records we really have are, well, they're fractured. It's this tragic mix of medical guesswork, some biographical attempts made years after the fact, and then these cold official police and court documents.
And that's our mission in this deep dive, isn't it? To take this stack of fragmented sources and try to stitch together some kind of understanding.
Exactly.
Not just of the facts, but of the immense psychological weight of living a life in conflict with your body and with society in early 20th century England.
It's a story of internal warfare, really, and it leads to such tragedy.
It does.
And we really have to tackle this complexity right at the top. The sources, from the very beginning, they grapple with this question of, what to call him. Bill was born Margaret Allen,
right,
assigned female at birth. But the author of our main biographical source makes a very specific decision.
What's that? They refer to him from that point on as Bill and use male pronouns. And their reasoning is, well, they say it's the least they could do.
Given how he so clearly wanted to live.
Precisely. It's an acknowledgement across time of the identity he fought his entire life for.
And that perfectly sets up the main theme we're tracking here. Profound gender dysphoria. This condition where your psychological identity is just completely the opposite of your biological sex.
And the critical piece of context here, the heartbreaking part, is that in the 1940s, society had absolutely no framework for this.
None at all.
They had no language for it. And what they didn't understand, they dismissed it, or they pathologized it.
So when the sources try to explain Bill's condition, they're kind of grasping at straws.
They immediately search for a biological origin, even though they admit it's pure speculation.
Let's unpack that a bit, because it really shows the medical mindset of the time. The source author looks at potential genetic irregularities. Right?
They do. They mention things like triple X syndrome, but they spend a lot more time on something called congenital adrenal hyperplasia, or CAH.
CAH. What's the connection they're trying to make there?
Well, it's a genetic disorder where the adrenal glands produce an excess of androgen hormones during fetal development. And for girls with CAH, the sources note this measurable tendency, a preference for traditionally masculine activities, male friends.
I see. So it's a way of trying to frame this deep psychological reality in purely clinical, physical terms.
It is. But the sources also make it really clear that people like Bill are hardly a modern invention.
Yeah.
They bring up this powerful historical case from way back in 1865.
The Joseph Marzo case.
Exactly. Documented by an Italian anatomist. Marzo lived his entire life as a man. I mean, he had the physical heavy beard, male pattern pubic hair. He conducted himself exclusively as a male.
To the point he even contracted STDs.
Right. But then, after he died, the dissection revealed he had a normal vagina, uterus, and ovaries.
So the point is, people living these contradictory lives were already documented, even in the mid-19th century.
They were, but they were seen as anatomical curiosities, not people with complex identities. That medical observation hadn't translated into any kind of social compassion.
Which just meant people like Bill were utterly isolated in their struggle.
Completely alone.
So if that's the external world, let's zoom in on the actual environment Bill was born into. This is Bolton, 1906. He was the 20th of 22 children.
That one detail, it tells you so much, doesn't it? This was a harsh, uncompromising industrial world.
You have to picture it. Back-to-back housing, overcrowding, just rampant poverty, and these very strict Victorian morals still policing everything.
And survival was everything. The sources paint this brutal picture of high childhood mortality. Cholera, typhoid, rickets.
And into this landscape comes a child whose internal sense of self immediately clashes with these rigid gender roles.
The aversion to, girl-orientated things, it apparently started around age 5, and this is where we had a really critical social distinction the sources make.
Between a tomboy and something else.
Right. A tomboy was tolerated because everyone just assumed she'd grow out of it, get married, conform.
But Bill's experience wasn't a phase. It was existential. It was a deep, fundamental feeling of being in the wrong body. And that was met with severe repression.
You can feel the torment in the descriptions of school life.
The gender separation.
It was absolute. Different gates to enter the school, separate play areas, even different things they were taught. It was a daily visceral reminder of his unwanted assignment.
And can you imagine the humiliation? Being forced into dresses, skirts, these awful buckled shoes?
While you're gazing across the playground at the boys in their dark suits, and crucially, their hard boots.
The boots are such a powerful symbol.
They are. They symbolize freedom, autonomy, the license to get dirty, to play rough and tumble games. Bill was trapped over with the girls' gentle games, just watching the life he believed was his own.
And the sources really suggest this constant demand for impossible conformity, this early rejection. It was the seed of his adult personality.
It creates this foundational rage, doesn't it? A child dealing with that constant war inside, feeling alienated and just wrong. It either drives you into withdrawal or
toward this aggressive emulation of the gender you identify with.
Exactly. Maybe even adopting the harshest, most dominant traits you see.
Which is precisely what we see when he enters the working world. He left school at 12, maybe 13, with very few qualifications.
And that first job in the textile mills just hammered home that gender division he hated.
So he was determined to create a masculine identity through physical work.
He was. The records show him consistently taking these traditionally male, physically demanding jobs. Heaving coal, painting and decorating, post office work, and of course the one he's most known for, a bus conductor.
Right, for Rottenstall Corporation Motors. And that's where his inner conflict really starts to become public.
It was a wartime job, so he likely filled a spot left by a man. The sources say he was efficient, hardworking,
but also very aggressive.
Verbally and physically, shoving and cuffing customers who were too slow or who complained.
And the sources directly link this to overcompensation.
A desperate attempt to project this image of undeniable, even confrontational male toughness. He wanted the camaraderie of the men, but his own aggression often just pushed them away.
It's a tragic cycle, the internal conflict breeding this external hostility that just isolates him more.
And the big moment of external assertion, it comes later. He'd moved away from Bolton, settled in backup, and it was only after his mother's death in 1943,
when he was about 37,
that he felt free to fully and openly transition his presentation.
That final constraint was gone.
Right. The fear of causing his mother shame or distress. So he cuts his hair into an Eton crop, adopts male clothing, and becomes known simply as Bill.
A profound act of self-definition.
It was. And after this, he makes this really serious public claim. He tells people he's booked a delicate operation to change him from a woman into a man.
Okay, but wait. Pioneering FTM surgery was completely unavailable, especially to a working-class person in the UK in the 1940s. So why tell that story?
The sources suggest a few possibilities. It might have been a necessary, desperate lie, a way to bridge the gap between his internal identity and his public life. Or it might refer to a less complex, but still major, surgery. Something aimed at removing the most painful physical reminders of his biology.
So not a full reconstruction, but maybe a bilateral mastectomy to flatten his chest.
Or a hysterectomy and oophorectomy. And you have to think about how significant that would be.
Ending menstruation.
Which the source suggests would have been this monthly, clinical, loathsome reminder of the body he rejected. Removing those organs would have been a profoundly psychological, identity-affirming act.
But whatever the truth of that claim was, the effort to maintain this identity, it just came at a brutal cost.
By his 40s, Bill was spiraling, seeing doctors constantly for chronic depression, anxiety.
And self-medicating heavily.
The alcohol, the excessive tobacco, it was all compounding the problem. Physical symptoms started showing up, vertigo, dizziness. It was a complete mental and physical collapse.
He had one close friend, though, Mrs. Annie Cook.
He did. He met her 2 years before the murder. But their relationship really highlights how difficult it was for Bill to form intimate bonds.
They took a trip together, and he insisted on registering them as Mr. Allen.
And at the trial, Annie revealed that Bill had asked her to be intimate, an experience she disliked, and it strained their friendship for a while. She also witnessed a truly terrifying moment.
The suicide attempt.
She saw him with a gas tube in his mouth.
So you have a man living right on the edge. The sources stress this singular extreme pressure of being transgender in that era. The isolation, the constant fear of being found out.
The feeling of being the perpetual outsider, the freak. The only relief, one commentator argues, was when he was completely alone. That constant tension just drives him deeper into withdrawal and anger.
And this exhausting, spiraling descent, it all culminates on August 29th, 1948.
The victim was a 68-year-old woman named Mrs. Chadwick, known locally as Old Nancy.
She was an eccentric figure, right? A fortune teller.
She was. And she appeared poor, but the sources detail this fascinating contradiction. She was secretly financially secure, collecting rent on 4 houses. She was also wary she'd been robbed a couple of years earlier.
And the initial contact between them was so mundane.
It was about sugar rationing. Bill called on her, but he was already in a desperate state. He later confessed he was in a nervy mood, and when she insisted on coming into his house, uninvited.
It just seemed to get on my nerve.
That phrase says it all. His tolerance for any external stress was at zero. And in that instant, on the spur of the moment, he struck her multiple times with a coal hammer.
His actions afterward were just pure chaos. He hid the body in the coal cellar, then went about his day, met Annie, went to the food office, had a drink at the pub.
But the guilt, the practical problem, the body, it drove him back that night. He tried to move her to the river, but rigor mortis had set in.
So he dragged the body into the street and just left it.
Dropped the hammer and her shopping bag into the River Irwell. This complete lack of premeditation, it would be crucial at the trial. He confessed very quickly.
Just a couple days later. And even in the confession, he's trying to maintain his male dignity. He insisted, "I didn't do it for the money. I was in one of my funny moods."
Defining it as a burst of volatile male temper, not a robbery.
Exactly. The trial came 3 months later, and the defense tried to argue insanity. The lawyer painted him as an unstable woman passing through the change of life, who committed a purposeless, fatuous, and mad murder.
Which brings us to the legal standard of the time, the M'Naghten rule.
Right. And for that to work, the defense had to prove that Bill was so mentally ill, he either didn't know what he was doing or didn't know it was wrong.
And that plea failed spectacularly.
It did, because his confession was too lucid. The prison doctor found his judgment to be good. He knew he'd committed murder and he knew it was wrong. So M'Naghten didn't apply.
He was found guilty, no recommendation for mercy, and his final weeks are...
Well, he faced his execution with this chilling, defiant composure.
The sources describe him as stoical, accepting his fate manfully. He made 2 final requests: to see Annie cook alone and to postpone the execution until after her birthday.
Both were denied.
And then comes the final, utterly needless indignity. Just before Bill walked to the scaffold on January 12, 1949.
He was forced to strip out of the male clothes he had worn for 13 years, the uniform of his self-created identity, and put on a striped prison dress.
A final institutional rejection of who he was.
Cool. And yet, even after that, the clergy who attended the execution were struck by him. They said he faced it as a man would, that he had more guts than most men I have seen.
His acceptance of death was the final act of masculine defiance.
And the source author really forces us to ask, should we be surprised? A person suffering a lifetime of nervous tension, depression, anxiety, total non-acceptance, is it shocking that they might eventually succumb to an explosion of violence?
This system created the pressure cooker. And when you connect Bill's fate to contemporary data, the picture is still incredibly grim. We're not in the 1940s anymore, but the stats for the modern transgender community are staggering.
Heartbreakingly so. Suicide attempt rates are calculated at 41% for transgender people. That's compared to a national average. That's a tiny fraction of that. And the murder rate for trans people is 16 times the national average.
So what does this all mean for you listening? Bill lived in a world of complete ignorance and unforgiving judgment. He was, by all accounts, a hard worker, but his internal identity conflict made him an outcast, and it ended in a violent, desperate act.
The question raised by these sources is this: how much of his tragedy was dictated by an internal conflict he was born with, and how much was created by that uncompromising, judgmental, poverty-stricken world that actively refused to let him be himself?
And was his death, accepted so stoically on that scaffold, simply a final, desperate act of masculine bravery in a world that insisted on defining him as something else? It's a powerful, dark question about the price of non-acceptance, and something to mull over long after this deep dive ends.